The sunlight danced across the distant peaks as Catherine Hayes stepped off the stagecoach, her emerald eyes capturing the wild beauty of Fort Kearny, Nebraska. The year was 1874, and the western frontier still hummed with untold possibility, danger, and destiny. She clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, the only comfort she had carried from her life back east. For a woman of 22, traveling alone to document the natural wonders of the West for a Philadelphia newspaper was bold, perhaps even reckless, but Catherine had never been one to shrink from adventure. "Madam, your bags," the stagecoach driver called, handing down her modest trunk. "You sure you got someone meeting you?" Catherine nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. Her contact, a Professor Wilson from the university, wasn't expected until tomorrow. "Thank you, I'll manage just fine," she replied with a confidence she didn't completely feel. The driver tipped his hat skeptically before climbing back into his seat. Within moments, the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving Catherine standing alone outside the frontier town's modest hotel. The settlement itself was smaller than she had imagined, a handful of wooden buildings stretched along a wide, dusty main street. Beyond lay the vast prairie, and further still, the rugged landscape she had traveled so far to explore. The hotel keeper, a stout woman with gray-streaked hair, eyed Catherine with a mixture of curiosity and concern as she entered. "Traveling alone, miss?" "Yes," Catherine replied, straightening her shoulders. "I'm a correspondent for the Philadelphia Gazette. I'm here to write about the natural wonders of the territory." The woman's eyebrows rose. "A lady journalist. Well, I suppose times are changing. Rooms at the top of the stairs, last door on the right, suppers at 6. She handed Catherine a heavy iron key. "And miss, might want to reconsider wandering these parts alone. Not all the wonders out here are friendly." Catherine merely smiled. She had heard similar warnings throughout her journey westward. "I'll keep that in mind, thank you." Her room was simple but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand, a small writing desk beneath the window. Catherine set her journal on the desk and moved to the window, gazing out at the horizon where the land met the endless sky. In the distance, she could make out the rugged outlines of canyon lands, her destination for tomorrow's expedition. After freshening up and changing into a simpler gown, Catherine ventured downstairs for supper. The dining room was sparsely populated: a few traveling salesmen, a table of railroad surveyors, and a solitary figure in the corner who immediately captured her attention. He sat with his back to the wall, a habit of men who didn't like surprises. His features were shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but when he looked up and their eyes met briefly, Catherine felt an unexpected jolt. There was something in his steady gaze, a quiet intensity that made her both curious and cautious. She took a seat at a small table near the window, ordering the house stew from a young serving girl. As she waited, Catherine pulled out her notebook, jotting down impressions of her journey thus far. She was so absorbed in her writing that she didn't notice the man approach until his shadow fell across her page. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice deep but not unkind. "But you wouldn't happen to be Miss Hayes, would you?" Catherine looked up, startled. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather vest. His face, now visible beneath his hat, was sun-weathered and handsome in a rugged way, with intelligent blue eyes that studied her carefully. "I am," she replied cautiously. "And you are?" "Lucas O'Connor," he replied, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Professor Wilson sent word asking if I could meet you. Seems he's delayed by 3 days on account of trouble with the railroad." "Oh," Catherine said, unable to hide her disappointment. 3 days would significantly cut into her already limited time for exploration. "I see. He mentioned you were keen on visiting Shadow Rock Canyon, Lucas continued, nodding toward the distant formations visible through the window. Asked if I might guide you, seeing as I know those parts better than most. Catherine hesitated, studying him more carefully. His clothes were dusty but well kept, his gun belt worn but not flashy like a gunslinger's. There was something solid about him, reliable. Are you a lawman, Mr. O'Connor? A slight smile touched his lips. Used to be. Rode with the Rangers in Texas for 5 years. Now I work as a scout and guide. Know every trail and water hole from here to the Rockies. He gestured to the chair opposite her. May I? Catherine nodded, her journalistic instincts piqued. Please do. Lucas settled into the chair with the easy grace of a horseman. Professor's telegram said you're writing about the territories for some newspaper back east, the Philadelphia Gazette, Catherine confirmed. They've commissioned a series on the natural wonders of the American frontier. I've already covered parts of Colorado and Wyoming. Lucas's eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite an undertaking for a lady traveling alone. Catherine bristled slightly. I assure you, Mr. O'Connor, I'm quite capable. I've encountered my share of difficulties and managed just fine. No doubt, he replied, and something in his tone suggested he actually believed her. But Shadow Rock Canyon isn't like other places you might have visited. Its walls twist like a maze. Easy to lose your bearings, especially when the light fades. Even experienced men have wandered in and never wandered back out. The serving girl arrived with Catherine's stew, momentarily interrupting their conversation. When she'd gone, Catherine leaned forward, intrigued rather than deterred by Lucas's warning. Then I'm fortunate Professor Wilson arranged for someone with your experience, aren't I? Lucas studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether her confidence was born of courage or naivete. We should start early tomorrow if you're set on exploring the canyon. I'd recommend simpler attire than what you're wearing now, something practical. I came prepared, Mr. O'Connor, Catherine assured him. I may be from Philadelphia, but I'm not foolish enough to hike canyon lands in silk and petticoats. This drew a genuine smile from him, transforming his serious features. No, I don't imagine you are, Miss Hayes. Their conversation continued through dinner, Lucas providing a detailed description of what she might expect in the canyon, the types of rock formations, the desert flora and fauna, the ancient pictographs left by indigenous peoples centuries before. Catherine listened intently, asking intelligent questions that clearly impressed him. By the time they parted for the evening, she felt a growing sense of anticipation for tomorrow's adventure. I'll meet you out front at first light, Lucas said as they stood in the hotel lobby. Bring plenty of water, a hat, and anything you need for your riding. The canyon's about 2 hours' ride from here. I'll be ready, Catherine promised. And Miss Hayes, he added, settling his hat back on his head. I'm glad the professor sent for me. Shadow Rock's not a place for solitary exploration, no matter how capable the explorer. With that, he departed into the growing darkness, leaving Catherine with the distinct impression that there was much more to Lucas O'Connor than met the eye and that tomorrow would bring adventures she hadn't anticipated when she'd stepped off the stagecoach that afternoon. True to her word, Catherine was waiting in front of the hotel as the first pale light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon. She had exchanged her traveling dress for a practical riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a simple blouse beneath a lightweight jacket. Her honey-blonde hair was neatly braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat that would offer protection from the sun. Lucas arrived leading 2 horses, his own sturdy buckskin, and a gentle-looking bay mare. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," he called, looking somewhat surprised to find her already prepared and waiting. "I see you're an early riser." In my experience, Mr. O'Connor, the morning light offers the best opportunities for observation, she replied, patting the satchel that contained her journal, pencils, and a small watercolor set. I hope you don't mind, but I've also brought my camera. She indicated the wooden box carefully wrapped and stowed in her larger bag. The photographic equipment had been expensive and cumbersome to transport across the country, but the images she'd captured had already proven invaluable for her articles. Lucas eyed the equipment with interest. "You know how to use that contraption?" "Quite well," Catherine answered with a hint of pride. "I studied with a professional in New York before embarking on this assignment." "Impressive," Lucas acknowledged, helping her secure her bags to the mare's saddle. "Though I should warn you, parts of the canyon are mighty narrow. Might be challenging to set up your equipment." "I'll manage," Catherine assured him, accepting his assistance as she mounted the mare. The horse was gentle but responsive, and Catherine patted its neck appreciatively. "She's lovely." "That's Penny, steadiest mare in the territory. She'll take good care of you," Lucas replied, swinging effortlessly into his own saddle. "We'll follow the river west for about an hour, then cut north toward the canyon lands. Should reach the entrance by mid-morning." As they rode out of town, the landscape gradually transformed around them. The flat prairie gave way to more varied terrain, rolling hills, scattered stands of cottonwood trees along the river, and eventually the first hints of the dramatic rock formations that define the western reaches of Nebraska territory. Lucas proved to be knowledgeable not just about the trails, but about the history and natural features of the region. "The Pawnee considered this sacred land," he explained as they paused to water the horses at a clear stream. "There are stories about the canyon, how it was carved by spirit beings in the early days of the world." Catherine made notes in her journal, captivated both by the information and by the way Lucas shared it with respect, rather than dismissal of indigenous beliefs. "You seem to know a great deal about the native peoples of this region," she observed. A shadow passed briefly across his features. "Spent some time with the Comanche years back. Learned to respect their ways, their understanding of the land." He didn't elaborate further, but Catherine sensed there was a deeper story, there one he wasn't ready to share. By mid-morning, they approached the canyon entrance. Catherine's breath caught at her first glimpse. The massive walls of striated sandstone rose dramatically from the earth, creating a narrow opening that seemed to lead into another world. The colors were astonishing: deep reds, warm oranges, and rich ambers, all more vibrant in the morning light than she could have imagined. "It's magnificent," she whispered, already reaching for her camera. Lucas nodded, a hint of pride in his expression, as if he were personally responsible for the canyon's beauty. "Wait until you see inside. There's pools of water that reflect the walls like mirrors, and places where the light filters down through cracks in the ceiling like it's coming through the windows of a cathedral." They dismounted at the canyon entrance, securing the horses in a small, grassy area with access to water. Lucas helped Catherine unpack her equipment, watching with interest as she set up the camera to capture the imposing canyon entrance. "How long does it take to make a photograph?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Depends on the light," Catherine replied, measuring chemicals with practiced precision. "Here, with the bright sun, not too long. In the darker parts of the canyon, it might be several minutes of exposure." Lucas waited patiently as she worked, maintaining a respectful distance that allowed her to concentrate. When she'd finished capturing the entrance, they repacked her equipment, leaving most of it with the horses and taking only what she needed for sketching and note-taking into the canyon itself. "Stay close," Lucas cautioned as they entered the narrow passage. "The main path is straightforward enough, but there are dozens of side canyons and passages. Easy to get turned around. Catherine nodded, understanding the wisdom of his warning as they ventured deeper. The temperature dropped perceptibly as high walls blocked the direct sunlight, creating a cool, hushed atmosphere that felt almost sacred. Their footsteps echoed slightly against the stone, and occasionally they heard the soft trickle of water or the distant call of a hawk circling above the rim. As promised, the canyon revealed itself to be a natural wonder beyond her expectations. They passed through chambers where the walls curved overhead to form natural domes, areas where ancient waters had carved the stone into fantastic shapes, and passages where millennia of flash floods had polished the rock to a smooth finish. Lucas proved an excellent guide, pointing out features she might have missed: fossilized remains embedded in the rock layers, pictographs painted in ochre and white on protected walls, plants that had adapted to thrive in the harsh environment. Catherine filled pages of her journal with descriptions and quick sketches, occasionally asking Lucas to pause while she captured a particular detail. By midday, they had reached what Lucas called the heart of the canyon, a wider chamber where a small, crystal-clear pool reflected the towering walls. Sunlight filtered down through a narrow opening far above, creating a spotlight effect on the tranquil water. "This is perfect for a midday rest," Lucas suggested, removing his hat as they entered the cooler space. "Water's clean enough to drink if you're thirsty." Catherine gratefully sank onto a smooth boulder near the pool's edge, removing her hat and fanning herself. Despite the canyon's relative coolness, the hike had been strenuous. "It's like something from a dream," she murmured, gazing at their surroundings. "I'm not sure my words will do it justice." "Your readers back east probably couldn't imagine a place like this exists," Lucas agreed, kneeling to fill their canteens from the pool. "Most folks I guide through here just stand and stare for a while, trying to take it all in." Catherine accepted the canteen he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. "What brought you to this territory, Mr. O'Connor? You mentioned Texas before." Lucas settled onto a rock nearby, his expression growing distant. "After the war, Texas felt changed, or maybe I was the one who changed." He gazed up at the sliver of sky visible above. "Wanted open country, fewer memories. Found work as a scout for the Army, then for the railroad surveys. Eventually started guiding private expedition scientists, hunters, the occasional writer like yourself." "And what do you think of our Wild West being documented for Eastern readers?" Catherine asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. Lucas considered this thoughtfully. "Reckon it depends on how it's written. Some writers make it all bloodshed and savagery, or tall tales about two-headed snakes and mountains of gold. Others make it seem like paradise, which brings folks out who aren't prepared for the realities." He looked directly at her. "What kind of truth do you aim to tell, Miss Hayes?" Catherine was struck by the perceptiveness of his question. "I try to show the beauty and harshness in equal measure, the natural wonders without embellishment they need none, and the people as I find them, complex and varied as anywhere else." She smiled slightly. "Though I admit, my editor sometimes pushes for more sensational accounts than I'm willing to provide." Lucas nodded appreciatively. "Reckon your readers are lucky then, getting the real story instead of what sells more papers." They continued their meal in comfortable silence, the canyon's peaceful atmosphere encouraging contemplation rather than conversation. As they prepared to explore further, Catherine noticed Lucas studying the narrow band of sky above with increasing concern. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Weather's changing," he replied, gesturing upward where clouds had begun to gather. "Wasn't in the forecast, but out here that doesn't mean much. We should start heading back." "But we've only explored half the canyon," Catherine protested, Disappointed at the prospect of cutting their expedition short, Lucas shook his head firmly. "Miss Hayes, flash floods in these canyons come without warning. Water from storms miles away can come rushing through these passages within minutes. We need to head back now." Recognizing the seriousness in his tone, Catherine nodded reluctantly. They packed quickly and began retracing their steps toward the entrance. The change in weather became more noticeable as they walked. A drop in temperature, a shift in the air pressure, and an eerie stillness that seemed to envelop the canyon. They had covered perhaps half the distance back when they heard a low, distant rumble that seemed to come from the very stone around them. Lucas grabbed her arm. "Run," he said urgently, pulling her forward. "Now." They broke into a sprint, racing through the narrowing passage as the rumbling grew louder behind them. Catherine's heart pounded as she realized what was happening. The flash flood Lucas had feared was coming, and they were in its path. "There!" Lucas shouted above the growing roar, pointing to a narrow cleft in the canyon wall. "Climb!" Without hesitation, Catherine scrambled toward the opening, Lucas right behind her. The cleft led to a ledge about 15 feet above the canyon floor, not high enough to exit the canyon, but potentially high enough to escape the immediate danger of the flood. They had just reached the safety of the ledge when the flood hit a terrifying wall of muddy water that surged through the passage below them with frightening force, carrying branches, debris, and smaller rocks in its churning flow. The roar was deafening, and Catherine pressed herself against the canyon wall, watching in horrified awe as the path they had been walking moments before disappeared beneath the torrent. "Are you all right?" Lucas shouted over the noise, his hand still gripping her arm protectively. Catherine nodded, unable to find her voice immediately. When she did speak, it was barely audible above the flood. "Will it reach us here?" Lucas studied the rising water with experienced eyes. "Don't think so unless it gets much worse, but we're not going anywhere until it subsides." As the initial surge passed, the water level stabilized at about 10 feet below their position, still dangerously high, but no longer rising. The ledge they occupied was about 6 feet wide and extended back into a shallow alcove in the canyon wall, providing some shelter. "What about the horses?" Catherine asked suddenly, remembering their mounts tethered at the canyon entrance. "They're on high ground," Lucas reassured her. "Penny's smart enough to break her tether if needed. They'll be fine." He surveyed their position carefully. "We, on the other hand, might be here a while. These floods can take hours to recede enough for safe passage." The reality of their situation began to sink in. They were trapped on a narrow ledge in the middle of Shadow Rock Canyon, with no way to reach the entrance until the floodwaters subsided. And based on the darkening sky visible through the canyon's opening far ahead, the storm was only beginning. "How long?" Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Lucas met her gaze honestly. "Could be hours. Could be till morning." Catherine took a deep breath, refusing to give in to panic. "Then I suppose we'll make the best of it. After all, Mr. O'Connor, this will certainly add an interesting chapter to my article." To her relief, Lucas chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing somewhat. "That's the spirit, Miss Hayes, though I'd appreciate if you'd call me Lucas under the circumstances. Formality seems a bit unnecessary when you're sharing a ledge with someone." "Then you must call me Catherine," she replied with a small smile. "Especially since it appears we'll be spending the night together in this canyon." As the initial danger passed, and they settled into their temporary refuge, Catherine found herself studying Lucas more closely. Despite the stress of their situation, he maintained a calm, pragmatic approach that she found reassuring. He methodically assessed their supplies: 2 canteens of water, some remaining food from their midday meal, a small emergency kit he carried in his saddlebag, and Catherine's journal and pencils. Could be worse, he concluded, arranging their supplies in the shallow alcove. We've got water, some food, and the ledge is dry. Main concern is the temperature. Canyon gets cold at night, and those clouds mean no sun to warm the rocks this afternoon. Catherine nodded, already feeling the cooler air against her skin. I have my jacket, at least. And I've got this, Lucas added, removing a folded woolen blanket from his saddlebag. Always carry it just in case. Good thing today. As the afternoon progressed, the storm intensified outside the canyon. They could hear thunder echoing off the distant walls and occasionally catch glimpses of lightning illuminating the narrow strip of sky visible from their position. The flood below them continued to churn, though its initial fury had subsided somewhat. To pass the time and distract herself from their predicament, Catherine began sketching the canyon from their unique vantage point. Lucas watched with obvious appreciation as the scene took shape under her skilled hand. You've got real talent, he observed, careful not to disturb her concentration. Thank you, Catherine replied without looking up from her work. My father was an artist. He taught me before he passed. I'm sorry for your loss, Lucas said quietly. Catherine paused her sketching, a soft smile touching her lips. It was many years ago, but thank you. He would have loved this place, the colors, the textures, the light. He always said true beauty existed where few people thought to look. Wise man, Lucas commented. After a moment's hesitation, he added, lost my father too, mining accident when I was 14. Catherine met his eyes, recognizing the shared experience of grief. Is that when you left home? Lucas nodded. Mother had passed years before, no siblings. Struck out on my own, worked cattle drives, odd jobs, lied about my age to join the Rangers at 17. His expression grew distant. Grew up fast like most boys back then. As daylight began to fade, their conversation continued, moving from personal histories to broader topics, books they had read, places they had seen, perspectives on the rapidly changing world around them. Catherine was surprised to discover that, despite his frontier appearance, Lucas was well-read and thoughtful, with nuanced views on everything from politics to philosophy. People often mistake education for wisdom, Lucas remarked when she commented on his knowledge. Met plenty of college men who couldn't find water in a rainstorm, and illiterate trappers who could read the land better than any book. Yet you value both, Catherine observed. Lucas smiled slightly. Try to. World's complicated enough without limiting yourself to one way of understanding it. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped dramatically. The storm continued outside, sending occasional surges of water through the canyon below. Lucas arranged the blanket in the deepest part of the alcove, creating a small nest that offered some protection from the growing chill. You should get some rest, he suggested, gesturing to the makeshift bed. I'll keep watch for a while, Catherine hesitated. And where will you rest? I'll manage, Lucas assured her. Used to sleeping rough. She shook her head firmly. That's unnecessary. The alcove is large enough for both of us if we arrange ourselves carefully, and sharing warmth would be the sensible thing under the circumstances. Lucas studied her for a moment, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. If you're certain. I am, Catherine replied with more confidence than she felt. It's the logical solution. With some awkward maneuvering, they settled side by side in the small space, the woolen blanket covering them both. Despite her assertion of practicality, Catherine found herself acutely aware of Lucas's proximity, the solid warmth of him beside her, the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to his clothes. Try to sleep, Lucas said softly, his voice closer to her ear than she'd anticipated. I'll wake you if anything changes. Catherine doubted sleep would come easily under such circumstances, but the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day soon overtook her. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the surprising comfort of Lucas's steady presence beside her, and the thought that of all the people to be trapped in a canyon with, she could have done far worse. She woke sometime in the deepest part of the night to find herself curled against Lucas's chest, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. For a moment, Catherine remained perfectly still, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. She should move away, restore the proper distance between them, but the warmth and security of his embrace was too compelling in the cold darkness. "You awake?" Lucas whispered, startling her. Catherine considered pretending she wasn't, but honesty prevailed. "Yes," she murmured. "I didn't mean to. That is, I'm sorry if I don't apologize," he interrupted gently. "Cold night. Natural to seek warmth." They lay in silence for several moments, neither moving away but both intensely aware of the impropriety of their position and the surprising rightness of it. "Storm's passing," Lucas finally said, his voice low in the darkness. "Stars are coming out. You can see them through the gap above." Catherine shifted slightly to follow his gaze upward. Sure enough, between the canyon walls, a narrow ribbon of night sky was now visible, studded with brilliant stars more vivid than any she had seen in Philadelphia. "They're beautiful," she breathed. "Like diamonds scattered on velvet," Lucas agreed, and the poetry of his description surprised her. "One advantage of being stuck here, best view of the stars you'll find anywhere." Catherine turned her head slightly to look at his profile in the starlight. The hard lines of his face seemed softened in the darkness, his usual vigilance momentarily replaced by a more contemplative expression. On impulse, she asked, "Are you ever lonely, Lucas, out here in these wild places?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "Sometimes. Used to think being alone was simpler, safer." His hand moved slightly against her shoulder, an unconscious gesture. "But there are moments watching a sunset from a mesa top, or finding some hidden valley no white man's ever seen when you wish there was someone beside you, someone who'd understand why it matters." The simple honesty of his admission touched something deep within Catherine. "Yes," she whispered. "I know exactly what you mean." Their eyes met in the darkness, and for a breathless moment, Catherine thought he might kiss her. Instead, Lucas gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. "Try to get some more sleep," he said softly. "Morning will be here soon enough." Catherine settled back against him, her mind racing despite her body's exhaustion. In the span of a single day, Lucas O'Connor had transformed from a stranger to something else, something she wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. As sleep reclaimed her, she wondered what the morning light would reveal, both about their situation and about the unexpected connection forming between them. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light reaching down into the canyon, gradually illuminating their surroundings. Catherine woke to find herself alone on the ledge, the blanket carefully tucked around her. For a moment, she felt a pang of disappointment before spotting Lucas at the edge of their refuge, studying the floodwaters below. "Good morning," she called, sitting up and attempting to smooth her disheveled hair. Lucas turned, a smile warming his features. "Morning, sleep well." Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the memory of how she had slept nestled against him, like they were far more to each other than mere traveling companions. "Well enough, under the circumstances," she replied, deflecting the question. "How are the waters?" "Receding," Lucas reported, gesturing below. "Another hour or two and we should be able to make our way out. Storm's passed completely." Indeed, the sky visible above was a clear, vibrant blue, with no trace of yesterday's threatening clouds. The flood waters, while still flowing through the canyon, had dropped significantly overnight and continued to fall. They shared the last of their food, some dried fruit and jerky from Lucas's provisions, and rationed their remaining water. As they ate, Catherine found herself studying Lucas more openly than she had before, noting details she'd missed in their previous interactions, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the careful precision with which he moved, the subtle expressions that crossed his face when he thought she wasn't watching. "You're staring, Miss Hayes," Lucas observed with gentle amusement, catching her gaze. "Catherine," she corrected him. "And yes, I suppose I am. Professional habit observing details for my writing." "And what details are you noting?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Catherine considered deflecting again, but decided on honesty instead. "That you're more complex than you first appear. That you move like someone who's always ready for trouble but speak like someone who's read more books than many professors I've known. That despite your warnings about the dangers of this place, you seem most at home here in this wilderness." Lucas's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something warmer, more appreciative. "Accurate observations," he acknowledged, "though I might note a few things about you as well." "Such as?" Catherine prompted when he didn't continue. "That beneath your proper Eastern manners, there's a spirit as wild as any I've encountered. That your courage isn't the reckless kind but something steadier, a determination to experience the world on your own terms. That your eyes reflect every emotion you try to hide behind polite conversation." The directness of his assessment left Catherine momentarily speechless. No man had ever seen her so clearly before, or at least, none had ever articulated it if they had. Before she could formulate a response, Lucas stood and moved to the edge of the ledge again. "I think the waters have dropped enough that we can start making our way out. It'll be slow going, the path will be muddy, and there may be new obstacles, but we should be able to reach the entrance by midday." The change of subject was perhaps for the best, Catherine thought as she gathered her belongings. Whatever was developing between them was too new, too undefined to examine in the harsh light of day. Better to focus on the practical matter of their safe return. The descent from their ledge proved more challenging than anticipated. The canyon walls were slick with moisture, and the normal footholds were either underwater or coated with slippery mud. Lucas went first, testing each step carefully before signaling Catherine to follow. When they reached the canyon floor, Catherine was shocked by how dramatically the flood had altered the landscape. What had been a relatively clear path was now littered with debris, fallen rocks, uprooted desert plants, branches carried from who knew how far away. The ground underfoot was treacherously soft in places, threatening to pull their boots in with each step. "Stay close," Lucas cautioned, offering his hand to help her over a particularly difficult section. Paths changed, and there might be unstable areas. Their progress was indeed slow, each step requiring careful consideration. Despite the challenges, Catherine found herself treasuring these final hours in the canyon, the unique beauty of the morning light on the wet stone, the unexpected wildflowers already beginning to emerge from the newly moistened soil, and most of all, the steady presence of Lucas beside her, his hand frequently extended to offer support when needed. By mid-morning, they could see the canyon entrance ahead, a bright rectangle of light that promised return to the wider world. As they approached, Catherine felt a curious reluctance growing within her. Once they left the canyon, the unique intimacy forced upon them by their predicament would inevitably change. They would return to their separate lives, she to her writing and eventual journey back east, he to his solitary existence as a guide and scout. Lucas seemed to sense her hesitation as they paused for a final rest before the last stretch to the entrance. "Something troubling you?" he asked, passing her the canteen. Catherine took a small sip before answering. "I was just thinking how strange it is that being trapped in this canyon might be one of the most meaningful experiences of my journey. It certainly wasn't what I planned to write about." "Sometimes the best stories find us when we're not looking for them," Lucas observed. "Like the best people." The simple statement carried weight that made Catherine's heart beat faster. "Lucas, when we return to Fort Kearney, I'll need to complete my assignment. Professor Wilson will arrive, and I'll have obligations to fulfill." "I understand," he replied, his expression carefully neutral. "You have your life back east." "Yes, but," Catherine hesitated, searching for the right words. "What happened here between us? I don't want it to simply end when we leave this canyon." Lucas studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes intent on hers. "What exactly happened here, Catherine?" "Might be wise to name it before we decide what to do with it." The directness of his question both startled and pleased her. "I'm not entirely certain," she admitted honestly. "I know that I've never felt so understood by someone I've known for so short a time. That sharing that ledge with you felt more right than it had any reason to. That the thought of simply saying goodbye in Fort Kearney feels insufficient." A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, warming his features. "For a writer, you're having a hard time with words." "Perhaps because there aren't adequate ones for this," Catherine replied, returning his smile despite her frustration. "What would you call it?" Lucas considered this, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'd call it a beginning, something worth exploring further if you're willing." "I am," Catherine said softly, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Though I don't know how. My assignment will take me to several more territories before I return to Philadelphia." "Then perhaps you need a guide," Lucas suggested, his tone casual though his eyes remained serious. "Someone who knows the territories, who could keep you safe while you complete your work." The implication was clear, and Catherine's heart leapt at the possibility. "Are you offering your services, Mr. O'Connor?" "Professionally and otherwise," he confirmed, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his confident exterior. "If that's something you might consider." Catherine felt a surge of joy that momentarily overshadowed all practical considerations. "I would consider it very seriously indeed," she replied, holding his gaze steadily. "In fact, I can't think of any arrangement that would please me more." The smile that broke across Lucas's face was like sunrise after the storm, brilliant and full of promise. Without another word, he closed the distance between them, one hand gently cupping her cheek as he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a claim. When Catherine responded, rising onto her toes to press more firmly against him, the kiss deepened into something that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since yesterday," he admitted, his voice husky. "I wish you had," Catherine replied with newfound boldness, her hand still resting on his shoulders. Lucas chuckled, the sound reverberating pleasantly through his chest. "Didn't seem proper given the circumstances." "And now," Catherine challenged, arching an eyebrow. "Now I'm thinking propriety might be overrated," he murmured, drawing her close for another kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. They emerged from the canyon shortly before noon, blinking in the bright sunlight of the open plains. To Catherine's relief, the horses were indeed safe. Penny had broken free of her tether as Lucas had predicted but remained nearby, grazing contentedly alongside Lucas's buckskin. As they approached the animals, Lucas suddenly tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his holstered revolver. Catherine followed his gaze and spotted what had alarmed him, a small group of riders approaching from the direction of Fort Kearney. "Expecting company?" Lucas asked quietly, positioning himself slightly in front of her. Catherine shook her head, squinting against the sunlight to make out the approaching figures. As they drew nearer, she recognized the lead rider, a balding man in a rumpled suit who could only be Professor Wilson, finally arrived from the east. "It's the professor," she confirmed. "And it appears he's brought a search party." Lucas relaxed slightly, but maintained his vigilant stance until the riders were close enough to identify clearly. The group consisted of Professor Wilson, the local sheriff, and two younger men who appeared to be ranch hands or town residents recruited for the search. "Miss Hayes," the professor called as they approached, relief evident in his voice. "Thank the heavens you're safe. When you didn't return to town yesterday, we feared the worst." "As you can see, Professor, I'm perfectly well," Catherine replied, stepping forward to greet him. "Mr. O'Connor and I were caught by the flash flood and had to shelter in the canyon overnight." The sheriff, a weathered man with a gray mustache, nodded knowingly. "Nasty storm that was. Figured you two might have got caught in it." He tipped his hat toward Lucas. "O'Connor, should have known if anyone could keep a lady safe in Shadow Rock, it'd be you." "Sheriff," Lucas acknowledged with a respectful nod. "We had some excitement but managed well enough." Professor Wilson dismounted somewhat awkwardly, approaching Catherine with obvious concern. "My dear Miss Hayes, I must apologize profusely for my delay. The railroad difficulties were most unexpected. And then to arrive and find you potentially in danger." He broke off, seeming to notice her disheveled appearance for the first time. "You must be exhausted. We should return to town immediately so you can rest." Catherine glanced at Lucas, a silent communication passing between them before she turned back to the professor. "Some rest would be welcome, yes. But I assure you, despite the unexpected adventure, my time in the canyon was most informative." "Excellent, excellent," the professor replied distractedly, clearly more concerned with her welfare than her professional observations. "We can discuss your findings once you've recovered. I've brought a wagon for your comfort. It's waiting about a mile back where the terrain became too rough." As the group prepared to return to Fort Kearney, Catherine found herself riding beside Lucas, slightly separated from the others who led the way. "So," she said quietly, "it seems our adventure has come to an official end." Lucas's eyes held a warmth that belied her statement. "Or transformed into something new," he suggested, "if you're still amenable to our discussed arrangement." "More than amenable," Catherine confirmed, "though we should perhaps discuss the details more thoroughly. Professor Wilson expects to continue to the Black Hills with me next week." "The Black Hills," Lucas's expression brightened. "Beautiful country, challenging terrain, definitely requires an experienced guide." His smile turned mischievous. "Fortunately, I know just the man for the job," Catherine laughed, the sound carrying across the open prairie. "How convenient." "I shall insist to the professor that we simply cannot proceed without your expertise." "And after the Black Hills?" Lucas asked, his tone more serious. Catherine considered this, her heart quickening at the possibilities stretching before them. "My assignment continues for 3 more months." "After that?" She met his gaze directly. "After that, I suppose we'll have decisions to make. 3 months is a good while to get to know a person," Lucas observed, "to figure out what matters most." "Yes," Catherine agreed softly. "I believe it is." As they rode toward Fort Kearney, the morning sun warming their backs and the promise of shared adventures ahead, Catherine knew with certainty that her articles about the American frontier would now tell a very different story than she had originally planned, one that included not just the natural wonders of the West, but the unexpected wonder of finding love in its wild heart. The following weeks unfolded like the pages of a story Catherine could never have imagined writing when she first stepped off that stagecoach in Fort Kearny. True to their discussion, Lucas was officially hired as their guide for the expedition to the Black Hills, with Professor Wilson expressing delight at securing the services of the most knowledgeable scout in the territory. What the professor didn't know, though Catherine suspected he had his suspicions, was that the professional relationship between journalist and guide had already evolved into something far more personal. In the evenings around the campfire, when the professor was absorbed in his geological specimens, Lucas and Catherine would find moments to themselves, sharing whispered conversations and occasional stolen kisses that left her breathless with anticipation for what their future might hold. The Black Hills expedition proved as successful professionally as it was personally. Catherine's articles, enhanced by her newfound perspective on the frontier, took on a depth and authenticity that her editor in Philadelphia declared revolutionary. Her photographs and sketches captured not just the physical beauty of the landscape, but something more elusive: the spirit of the place, its history, its significance to both native peoples and newcomers. Lucas, for his part, revealed himself to be not just a skilled guide but a man of surprising layers. In the quieter moments of their journey, he shared more of his past, his brief formal education cut short by necessity, his self-taught love of literature nurtured during long nights on the trail, the painful lessons of the war that had driven him westward in search of peace. "Never expected to find what I was looking for," he admitted one evening as they sat watching the sunset from a high ridge overlooking a valley lush with pines. "Kept thinking the next horizon might hold the answer. Took a while to realize maybe it wasn't a place I needed." Catherine, leaning comfortably against his shoulder, understood completely. She had come west seeking professional advancement, adventure, perhaps even a touch of glory. Instead, she had found something she hadn't known was missing: a connection that transcended her carefully constructed plans. As their expedition continued from the Black Hills to the Wind River Range and eventually toward Colorado territory, Catherine found herself dreading the completion of her assignment more with each passing day. Their time together had a finite quality that she resented even as she treasured each moment. "You're quiet tonight," Lucas observed as they sat beside a small fire, the professor having retired early to his tent. 3 months had passed since their first meeting, and tomorrow they would return to civilization, the small but growing town of Denver, where Catherine would catch the eastbound train. "Just thinking," she replied, watching the flames dance in the darkness, "about Philadelphia." There was a careful neutrality in his tone that didn't quite mask the apprehension beneath. Catherine shook her head slowly. "About choices, paths taken and not taken." She turned to face him fully. "Lucas, these past months have been the most extraordinary of my life, and not because of the landscapes we've seen or the stories I've written." His hand found hers in the firelight, fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "For me as well. What happens when we reach Denver?" She asked, the question that had been hovering between them for weeks finally finding voice. Lucas was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "That depends on what you want to happen, Catherine. What if what I want seems impossible?" she whispered. "I've found that word doesn't hold much meaning out here," he replied, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Tell me what you want and we'll figure out the rest." Catherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to continue writing, it's part of who I am. But I also want this," she gestured between them, "us. I don't want to choose between the life I've built and the life I've found with you." Lucas studied her face in the flickering light, his expression softening. "Who says you have to choose?" He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn envelope. Been carrying this around for a few weeks now, waiting for the right moment. Catherine accepted the envelope with curiosity. Inside, she found a newspaper clipping an advertisement for a small printing press for sale in Denver, along with an accompanying letter offering Lucas a position as a correspondent for a Chicago newspaper interested in authentic frontier reporting. "I have some savings," he explained as she read. "Enough to buy that press, maybe start a small paper in one of the growing towns. Denver, perhaps, or even back in Fort Kearny." His eyes held hers steadily. "You could write what you want, not just what some Eastern editor thinks his readers want to hear. And I could contribute what I know about the territories." "You do that?" Catherine asked, amazed at the thought he'd put into their future. "Give up guiding to start a newspaper?" "I'd still guide sometimes," Lucas clarified. "Special expeditions when they interest me. But yes, I'd change my path to walk alongside yours if you'd have me." The implication behind his words was clear, and Catherine felt her heart swell with emotion. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. O'Connor, or something more?" Lucas's smile deepened as he shifted closer, taking both her hands in his. "Catherine Hayes, I fell in love with you in a canyon by starlight, and every day since has only confirmed what I already knew then, that you're the woman I want beside me for all the days I have left. So yes, I'm proposing something much more than business." His voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "I'm proposing marriage if you'll have me." Catherine's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "You know, for a man who claims not to be formally educated, you have quite a way with words." "Is that a yes?" Lucas asked, his own voice slightly unsteady. "Yes," Catherine whispered, closing the distance between them. "Yes to marriage, yes to the newspaper, yes to building a life together that honors both our dreams." Their kiss sealed the promise, tender at first, then deepening with the certainty of their shared future. When they finally parted, Lucas pressed his forehead to hers, his smile visible even in the dim firelight. "Should we tell the professor tomorrow?" Catherine asked, thinking of the academic who had unwittingly brought them together. Lucas chuckled. "I think he suspected for some time. Man's observant for all his distracted ways." The prediction proved accurate. When Catherine informed Professor Wilson of their plans the following morning, his response was a knowing smile and a comment that he had rarely seen two people more naturally suited. His only request was that they allow him to announce their engagement at a small gathering he would host in Denver, before Catherine's scheduled departure, a departure that would now be temporary, rather than permanent. Denver welcomed them with the bustling energy of a city, rapidly transforming from frontier outpost to regional center. The professor's colleagues at the university there received Catherine's articles with enthusiasm, and several expressed interest in the newspaper venture she and Lucas were planning. The engagement party, held at one of Denver's finer hotels, brought together an eclectic mixture of academics, journalists, local business leaders, and a few of Lucas's more respectable acquaintances from his years on the frontier. Catherine, wearing a new dress purchased for the occasion, deep blue silk that complemented her eyes, found herself the center of attention in a way she had never experienced as a writer. "They're all wondering how I managed to convince you to stay in this wilderness," Lucas murmured as they shared a quiet moment on the hotel's veranda, the evening air cool and fragrant with pine. Catherine smiled, leaning slightly against his solid presence beside her. "Perhaps I should write an article about it, how the West captured an Eastern heart." "Has a nice ring to it," Lucas agreed, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. though I think it was less the West and more a particular Westerner that did the capturing. True, Catherine acknowledged, turning to face him fully. The starlight above the city reminded her of that night in the canyon, the beginning of everything. Though I maintain that being lost was the best thing that ever happened to me. Lucas's expression grew serious, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. You were never lost, Catherine. You were exactly where you were meant to be. We both were. 3 months later, on a clear autumn day with the aspens turning gold in the distant mountains, Catherine Hayes became Catherine O'Connor in a simple ceremony held on the banks of the river outside Fort Kearny. The town had welcomed them back with open arms when they'd returned to establish their newspaper, the Frontier Chronicle, in a modest building on the main street. Their wedding was attended by an unlikely assortment of guests. Professor Wilson had traveled from the East for the occasion, joined by the local townspeople who had already embraced the couple as their own. A delegation of Pawnee with whom Lucas had maintained respectful relations, and even Catherine's editor from Philadelphia, who had made the journey west partly out of curiosity about the man who had lured away his most promising writer. "He's not what I expected," the editor confided to Catherine at the reception that followed, nodding toward Lucas, who was deep in conversation with the professor and the Pawnee representatives. "Rougher around the edges, certainly, but there's something substantial about him." "Yes," Catherine agreed simply, watching her husband with unabashed pride. "There is." The honeymoon was uniquely their own, a 2-week expedition to Shadow Rock Canyon, this time with no flash floods or search parties to interrupt their exploration. They camped on the canyon rim, spending their days documenting the natural wonders below and their nights wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast canopy of stars. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat beside their campfire, Catherine's head resting comfortably on his shoulder. She considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss certain conveniences. Bookshops on every corner, theater performances, hot baths that don't require hauling water." She smiled up at him, reaching to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "But I've never once regretted my choice. Not for a moment." Lucas caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with a tenderness that still made her heart race. "The Chronicle's doing well enough that we might manage a trip east next year if you'd like. Could visit your old haunts, see some of those theater performances." "I'd like that," Catherine admitted. "Though only if we promise to return. This is home now." "Home," Lucas repeated, drawing her closer. "Never thought I'd find that word having any real meaning again." "And now," Catherine prompted softly. His kiss was answer enough, deep and certain, filled with the promise of all their tomorrows yet to come. When they finally broke apart, Lucas smiled down at her, starlight reflected in his eyes. "Now," he said, "home is wherever we are together." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. The Frontier Chronicle flourished, gaining a reputation for honest reporting and thoughtful commentary that extended far beyond the boundaries of Nebraska territory. Catherine's articles were regularly reprinted in Eastern publications, bringing authentic frontier perspectives to readers who had previously known the West only through sensationalized accounts. Lucas found his own voice as a writer, his detailed knowledge of the territories and their peoples providing insights that complemented Catherine's more polished prose. Together, they created not just a successful newspaper, but a forum for understanding between the divergent cultures converging on the frontier. Their personal life blossomed alongside their professional success. 2 years after their wedding, Catherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Lucas's father. The boy inherited his mother's inquisitive nature, and his father's easy way with people, toddling around the newspaper office and charming visitors from an early age. "He's going to be a writer," Catherine predicted, watching 4-year-old James arrange wooden blocks with the same concentration she brought to her articles. "Or maybe a scout," Lucas countered, noting the boy's keen observation of his surroundings. "Either way, he'll forge his own path." 3 years later, their daughter Elizabeth joined the family, bringing a determined spirit that reminded both parents of themselves. With her mother's golden hair and her father's striking blue eyes, she became the darling of Fort Kearney, trailing after her brother and insisting on being included in all his adventures. As the children grew, so did the town around them. Fort Kearney gradually transformed from frontier outpost to established community, with proper schools, churches, and civic institutions. The O'Connors played their part in this evolution, their newspaper serving as both chronicle and catalyst for progress. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Catherine with a deed to a small ranch outside town, a place where their children could run free, and where Lucas could indulge his love of horses while still remaining close enough to manage the newspaper. "It's perfect," Catherine whispered as they stood on the porch of the modest but well-built house, watching James and Elizabeth race across the meadow that was now their own. "Everything I never knew I wanted." "Not bad for a story that started with being lost in a canyon," Lucas replied, slipping an arm around her waist. At 40, he was still as strong and vital as the day they'd met, though silver now threaded through his dark hair at the temples. Catherine leaned into his embrace, reflecting on the path that had led them here. "I've been thinking about that actually, about writing our story, how we met, how everything changed in a single storm." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A novel instead of articles." "You've mentioned that ambition before." "Yes, but I think I'm finally ready," Catherine explained, her eyes alight with creative energy. "Not just our story exactly, but a tale inspired by it, about finding love in unexpected places, about how being lost can sometimes be the only way to be found." "I'd read that," Lucas said with a smile, bending to kiss her forehead. "Though I already know the ending." "Do you now?" Catherine challenged playfully. Lucas nodded, his expression softening as he gazed at their children playing in the distance, and then back to the woman who had transformed his life. They live happily ever after, not without challenges or sorrows that wouldn't be true to life, but together, facing whatever comes with the same courage they found in each other from the beginning. Catherine felt tears well in her eyes at the simple perfection of his summary. "You really should write more often, Mr. O'Connor. You have quite a way with endings." "Only because you gave me the best beginning," he replied, drawing her close for a kiss that held all the passion of their first yet was deepened by the decade of love they had shared. As twilight settled over their new home and stars began to appear in the vast Nebraska sky, the same stars that had watched over them that fateful night in Shadow Rock Canyon, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that their story, still unfolding with each passing day, was indeed the greatest adventure she could have ever imagined. And like all the best stories, it had begun with being lost and found in a canyon by Starlight, in the arms of a cowboy who had searched until he found her, and in doing so had helped her find herself.